Most people don't realize that while the world obsesses over oil prices and gas shortages, the United States has quietly lost control of the resource that will determine which nations survive and thrive in the 21st century. It's not lithium for batteries, rare earth elements for technology, or even uranium for nuclear power. It's something so basic that we take it for granted until it's gone: freshwater. What if I told you that Canada now controls more of North America as usable freshwater than the United States, despite having 1/9 the population, and that this advantage is growing stronger every year as climate change reshapes the continent's water systems? While American cities implement water rationing and the Southwest faces unprecedented drought, Canada sits on vast freshwater reserves that are entirely within its borders, immune to international treaties and foreign interference. Today, we're going to explore how geography, climate, and strategic foresight have positioned Canada as the ultimate water superpower at exactly the moment when water scarcity is becoming the defining challenge of our time. More importantly, we'll examine why this shift represents one of the most significant geopolitical changes in North American history, one that most people haven't even noticed yet. For over a century, water abundance has been one of America's greatest strategic advantages. The Great Lakes system, the Colorado River, the Mississippi watershed, these massive water sources powered American agriculture, industry, and urban development on a scale that no other nation could match. Water was so plentiful that Americans built cities in deserts, irrigated vast agricultural regions, and developed water-intensive industries without seriously considering long-term sustainability. But this abundance was always more fragile than it appeared. Much of America's water wealth depends on shared resources that cross international boundaries, complex river systems that span multiple states with competing interests, and underground aquifers that took thousands of years to fill but can be drained in decades. The Great Lakes, which contain 20% of the world's surface freshwater, are shared with Canada under treaties dating back to 1909. Every major decision about Great Lakes water levels, diversions, or usage requires coordination between 2 federal governments, 8 state governments, 2 provincial governments, and dozens of municipal authorities. This complexity creates endless opportunities for disputes, delays, and political deadlock. The Colorado River system, which supplies water to 40 million people across 7 states, is facing what hydrologists call structural deficit. More water is allocated to users than the river actually contains, even in good years. Lake Mead and Lake Powell, the massive reservoirs that store Colorado River water, have dropped to record low levels, exposing rocks and marina docks that haven't seen sunlight in decades. The Ogallala Aquifer, which underlies 8 states and provides irrigation water for America's agricultural heartland, is being pumped at rates far faster than natural recharge. Hydrologists estimate that current usage rates will deplete accessible water in many areas within 20-30 years, transforming some of the world's most productive farmland into desert. Meanwhile, climate change is reshaping precipitation patterns across North America in ways that favor northern regions over southern ones. The American Southwest is experiencing what scientists call aridification, not just temporary drought, but a permanent shift toward drier conditions. Annual snowpack in the Rocky Mountains, which provides much of the West's water supply, has declined by 15-30% over the past 3 decades. Canada, by contrast, is experiencing the opposite trend. Rising temperatures are increasing precipitation across most Canadian watersheds. Earlier, spring melts are extending the growing season for northern agriculture. Retreating permafrost is releasing stored water into rivers and lakes, increasing flow rates and water levels. But Canada's water advantage goes far beyond favorable climate trends. The country's geography creates what hydrologists call water sovereignty, control over freshwater resources that are entirely within national borders, not subject to international treaties or shared management agreements. The 3 massive lakes at the heart of Canada's water wealth, Lake Winnipeg, Lake Manitoba, and Lake Winnipegosas, are remnants of glacial Lake Agassiz, which once covered much of central North America. When the ice sheets retreated 10,000 years ago, they left behind these interconnected water bodies that together contain more freshwater than many countries possess in total. Unlike the Great Lakes, which straddle the US-Canada border and require constant diplomatic management, Manitoba's lakes are entirely within Canadian territory. Canada can make decisions about water levels, usage rights, and environmental protection without consulting foreign governments or navigating complex international agreements. This sovereignty becomes crucial when water scarcity forces difficult choices. If drought conditions worsen in the American Midwest, political pressure will inevitably build for diversions from the Great Lakes to supply stressed agricultural and urban areas. Canada, as a co-owner of the Great Lakes, would have veto power over such projects, but the diplomatic and economic pressure would be enormous. The Prairie Lakes, by contrast, face no such political vulnerabilities. They're Canada's water, period. This allows for long-term planning, consistent environmental policies, and strategic decision-making without the complications of international negotiation. The scale of Canada's freshwater dominance is staggering when you examine the numbers. Canada holds approximately 20% of the world's surface freshwater supply, despite containing only 0.5% of the world's population. The country has roughly 2 million lakes, more than the rest of the world combined. The average Canadian has access to 87,000 cubic meters of renewable freshwater per year, compared to just 9,000 cubic meters for the average American. But raw volume tells only part of the story. The quality and accessibility of Canada's water resources create additional advantages that become more valuable as global water stress increases. Canadian freshwater systems are generally cleaner and require less treatment than water sources in more densely populated regions. The northern location means less agricultural runoff, fewer industrial pollutants, and lower levels of pharmaceutical and chemical contamination that plague water systems in major urban areas. The cold climate actually helps preserve water quality. Lower temperatures slow bacterial growth, reduce evaporation rates, and minimize the biological processes that can degrade water purity. Lakes and rivers that freeze for several months each year undergo natural purification cycles that clean water more effectively than many engineered treatment systems. Canada's vast geography also provides natural redundancy. If one watershed experiences contamination or drought, multiple alternatives exist within reasonable transportation distances. This resilience becomes increasingly valuable as climate change makes weather patterns more unpredictable and extreme. The economic implications of Canada's water advantage are already becoming visible across multiple industries. Agriculture, manufacturing, energy production, and technology all depend on reliable access to high-quality freshwater. As water becomes scarcer and more expensive in other regions, industries that can relocate are increasingly looking north. The semiconductor industry provides a compelling example. Modern chip manufacturing requires enormous quantities of ultra-pure water. A single fabrication plant can use 15-20 million gallons per day. As global chip production expands to meet growing demand, companies are discovering that water access is becoming a limiting factor for new facility locations. Traditional semiconductor hubs, like California's Silicon Valley and Arizona's Silicon Desert, are facing water restrictions that could constrain future expansion. California has implemented mandatory water conservation measures that affect industrial users. Arizona has warned that continued population growth may outstrip available water supplies within a decade. Canadian provinces, meanwhile, are actively marketing their water abundance to attract high-tech manufacturing. Ontario and Quebec have launched initiatives to promote themselves as ideal locations for water-intensive industries, emphasizing both the quantity and quality of their freshwater resources. The results are beginning to show. Several major technology companies have announced plans for Canadian facilities, citing water availability as a key factor in location decisions. These aren't just assembly plants. They're advanced manufacturing operations that require the kind of long-term water security that only northern regions can provide. The agricultural implications are equally significant. As climate change intensifies drought conditions across traditional farming regions, the ability to guarantee irrigation water becomes a crucial competitive advantage. The American Great Plains, which produce much of North America's wheat, corn, and soybeans, depend heavily on the Ogallala Aquifer for irrigation. As this underground water source depletes, farming operations will face impossible choices. Invest in expensive water conservation technology, switch to drought-resistant crops that may be less profitable, or abandon agricultural production entirely. Canadian prairie provinces face no such constraints. The combination of abundant surface water, improving precipitation patterns, and longer growing seasons due to climate change is actually expanding agricultural potential in regions that were previously too cold or dry for intensive farming. This shift is creating what agricultural economists call climate arbitrage, the ability to profit from geographical differences in water availability and growing conditions. Canadian farmers can increase production while their American competitors struggle with water limitations, potentially capturing larger shares of global food markets. The energy sector implications may be the most significant of all. Both traditional energy production and renewable energy systems require substantial water inputs for cooling, steam generation, and processing. As energy demand grows and power generation shifts toward cleaner technologies, water availability increasingly determines where energy infrastructure can be built. Nuclear power plants, which provide carbon-free electricity but require enormous quantities of cooling water, face particular constraints. Many existing U.S. nuclear facilities are already struggling with water temperature and availability issues that force periodic shutdowns during heat waves or drought conditions. Canada's abundant cold freshwater makes it an ideal location for both existing nuclear technology and advanced reactor designs that could provide clean energy for North American markets. The country's as vast water resources can support energy infrastructure expansion without the environmental and supply constraints facing American utilities. Hydroelectric power represents Canada's most obvious water-based energy advantage. The country already generates nearly 2/3 of its electricity from hydroelectric sources, and vast untapped potential remains in northern river systems. As demand for clean electricity grows, Canada's hydroelectric capacity represents a strategic asset that no other North American nation can match. But the geopolitical implications of Canada's water dominance extend far beyond economics. Water scarcity is already reshaping international relationships, creating new forms of dependence and leverage that will define 21st century diplomacy. The United States has spent decades using energy resources, oil, natural gas, coal, as foreign policy tools. Countries that controlled energy supplies could influence global politics through export restrictions, pricing decisions, and infrastructure investments. American control over global energy markets provided significant diplomatic leverage throughout the 20th century. Water is becoming the new oil in terms of geopolitical significance. Nations with abundant freshwater resources will increasingly find themselves in positions of power relative to water-stressed neighbors. The ability to guarantee water security will become as strategically important as energy security was in previous generations. Canada's water wealth positions the country to exercise this new form of soft power, particularly in its relationship with the United States. As American cities and agricultural regions face increasing water stress, the temptation to look north for solutions will grow stronger. This creates both opportunities and risks for Canada. Water exports could become a major source of revenue and diplomatic influence, but they could also make Canada a target for political pressure or even military intervention if water scarcity becomes severe enough to threaten American national security. The historical precedent is concerning. When resource scarcity threatens national survival, even democratic countries have been willing to use military force to secure access to vital supplies. The American invasion of Iraq was partly motivated by concerns about long-term oil security. If water scarcity becomes severe enough, similar calculations could apply to freshwater resources. Canada's challenge is to leverage its water advantages without creating the kind of dependence relationships that could undermine its sovereignty. This requires careful strategic planning to maximize economic benefits while maintaining political independence. The infrastructure requirements for large-scale water export are enormous and create their own strategic vulnerabilities. Pipelines, canals, and pumping stations that could move Canadian water to American markets would represent massive capital investments that could be difficult to protect or control once built. International law regarding transboundary water resources is complex and evolving. And while Canada has clear sovereignty over lakes and rivers entirely within its borders, the legal framework for water exports is less established. Trade agreements, like NAFTA and its successor USMCA, contain provisions that could complicate Canadian control over water resources if large-scale exports begin. The environmental implications also require careful consideration. While Canada's water resources are vast, they're not unlimited. Large-scale diversions could affect ecosystems, wildlife patterns, and indigenous communities that depend on natural water flows. Climate change adds another layer of uncertainty. While current trends favor increased precipitation in Canadian watersheds, climate models suggest that weather patterns will become more variable and extreme. Planning water infrastructure based on current conditions could prove inadequate if climate change accelerates or shifts in unexpected directions. Despite these challenges, Canada's water advantage represents one of the most significant geopolitical assets any nation has possessed in modern history. The combination of abundance, quality, sovereignty, and strategic location creates opportunities that no other country can replicate. The key is developing a water strategy that maximizes long-term benefits while minimizing strategic vulnerabilities. This means treating water as a strategic resource rather than a simple commodity, maintaining sovereign control while selectively engaging in international cooperation, and using water wealth to build broader economic and technological advantages. Canada is already moving in this direction through initiatives that use water abundance to attract high-value industries rather than simply exporting raw water. The strategy of becoming a destination for water-intensive manufacturing, technology development, and agricultural production creates more sustainable economic benefits than bulk water sales. This approach also builds domestic capabilities and infrastructure that strengthen Canada's overall economic position. Instead of becoming dependent on water exports, Canada develops advanced industries that use water as an input to create higher value products and services. The international implications of Canada's water strategy extend beyond North America. As global water stress increases, countries around the world will seek reliable partners for water-intensive industries and food production. Canada's reputation for political stability, environmental stewardship, And technological sophistication makes it an attractive destination for international investment and partnerships. European companies, facing increasing water restrictions and environmental regulations, are already exploring Canadian operations as ways to maintain production while meeting sustainability goals. Asian manufacturers, dealing with severe water pollution and scarcity issues in traditional industrial regions, see Canadian facilities as long-term hedges against supply chain disruption. This international dimension could make Canada's water wealth even more valuable over time. Instead of competing primarily with American regions for water-intensive industries, Canada could capture global market share by offering what becomes increasingly rare: guaranteed long-term access to high-quality freshwater. The technological implications are equally promising. Water scarcity is driving innovation in water treatment, recycling, and conservation technologies. Countries and companies with abundant freshwater resources have natural advantages in developing and testing these technologies under real-world conditions. Canada could become a global center for water technology development, using its abundant resources to perfect systems that could then be exported to water-stressed regions worldwide. This creates a virtuous cycle where water abundance enables technological leadership, which in turn creates new economic opportunities and strategic advantages. Canadian universities are establishing research programs focused on water management and conservation technologies. Government funding for water research has increased dramatically, recognizing that intellectual property in water technologies could become as valuable as the water resources themselves. The military and security implications of water control are becoming increasingly apparent to defense planners in both countries. Water infrastructure represents critical vulnerability that could be targeted by hostile nations or terrorist organizations. Ensuring reliable access to fresh water has become a national security priority. Canada's geographic advantages extend to water security as well. The dispersed nature of Canadian water resources makes them difficult to disrupt through targeted attacks. The northern location provides natural protection from many types of conventional military threats. The timeline for these changes is compressed compared to previous resource transitions. The shift from coal to oil took decades to reshape global economics and geopolitics. Climate change and population growth are accelerating water scarcity at a pace that could transform international relationships within a decade or two. American policymakers are beginning to recognize the strategic implications of water scarcity, but institutional and political barriers make rapid adaptation difficult. The federal system that divides water management among states creates coordination problems. Short-term political cycles discourage long-term infrastructure investments. Existing water rights and allocation systems resist change even when current arrangements become unsustainable. Canada's parliamentary system and smaller scale create advantages in developing coherent national water strategies. Provincial governments control water resources, but must coordinate with federal authorities on international issues. This creates complexity, but less than the American system of overlapping federal, state, and local jurisdictions. The economic data increasingly supports the conclusion that North America is experiencing a fundamental shift in water-based comparative advantage. Canadian regions are attracting investment and population growth, while water-stressed American areas face constraints and decline. This isn't a temporary drought cycle or short-term climate fluctuation. It's a structural change in the continental water balance that will likely accelerate over coming decades. The regions and countries that adapt quickly to these new realities will capture disproportionate benefits, while those that resist change will face mounting costs and limitations. Canada's water wealth represents more than just a natural resource advantage. It's a strategic asset that could reshape North American economic and political relationships for generations. The country that was once dependent on commodity exports to wealthier neighbors could find itself in the position of controlling the resource that determines where future prosperity is possible. The transformation is already underway. While American cities implement water restrictions and agricultural regions face difficult choices about future viability, Canadian communities are planning for growth and expansion. The contrast couldn't be clearer or more significant. What we're witnessing is the early stages of a continental power shift driven by the most basic requirement for human civilization: access to clean, abundant fresh water. The nation that secures this access will inherit the future. The nation that loses it faces decline and dependence. Canada has won this geographic lottery through no particular virtue or strategy. The glaciers that carved out the prairie lakes and northern watersheds operated according to geological forces beyond human control. But recognizing and leveraging this advantage requires strategic thinking that could determine whether Canada becomes a true superpower or simply another resource-rich nation that fails to capitalize on its natural gifts. The water wars of the 21st century won't be fought with armies and invasions. They'll be won by the countries smart enough to recognize that geography is destiny, and that the future belongs to those who control the rivers and lakes that make modern civilization possible. Canada controls those waters, The question now is whether they'll control the future. Have you noticed changes in water availability or restrictions in your region? Share your observations in the comments. Your local perspective helps illustrate the scope of North America's water transformation.